afternoon and thank you for joining us on Future TV. I'm Linda Tamim and these are today's top stories. Progressive Socialist Party leader MP Walid Jumblat says he rejects the idea of linking Hezbollah to ISIS and stresses the importance of supporting the army in its battle against terrorism. A rocket fired from Lebanese territory hit northern Israel on the 47th day of the war against Hamas in and around Gaza. And Israel launches more airstrikes on Gaza, pounding a 13-story apartment tower following a warning to residents to evacuate. Progressive Socialist Party leader MP Walid Jumblat has rejected the idea that Hezbollah and ISIS were of a similar nature, saying that accusations linking the two were nothing more than political accusations. Speaking while on a tour in Alay, Jumblat stressed the importance of supporting the Lebanese army, considering it a mandatory issue in Lebanon's battle against terrorism. He also warned that the presidential vacuum was not just a concern for Lebanon's Christians, but affected the whole country. He carried on saying there were attempts with Speaker Nabih Berri and Hezbollah Secretary General Sayyid Hassan Nasrallah to reach a compromise that would enable the continuity of state institutions. The vacancy is destructive and it weakens Lebanon, the Druze leader said, emphasizing that a compromise was necessary for the continuity of public institutions. The Lebanese army is on full alert in Arsal after a militant-affiliated resident was killed last night, and irregular activity targeted the border region's outskirts. This comes after Lebanese forces leader Samir Jaja said Lebanon will be the end of ISIS fighters if they decided to come, adding the country should close its borders to prevent the infiltration of Islamist militants via the porous Syrian-Lebanese boundary, blaming Hezbollah for the government's failure to seal off the frontier. Yumna Naufal has the wrap.
Finance Minister Ali Hassan Khalil stresses that Lebanon's battle against terrorism and the Islamic State of Iraq and the Levant does not require any foreign intervention, saying that the change and reform bloc's proposal for a constitutional amendment requires local accord. He pointed out that the battle between the Lebanese army and jihadists in the northeastern border town of Arsal, which erupted on August 2nd, united the Lebanese in solidarity with the army against terrorism. The minister rejected direct negotiations with what he claims are terrorists to free the security personnel who were taken hostage. The unrest ended with a ceasefire on August 7th and the withdrawal of the gunmen who kidnapped the soldiers and security forces. So far, 8 of the captives have been released. Media reports suggest the captors are seeking to exchange theirs for Islamist inmates held at Rumiyah prison. Khalil, who is a Speaker Nabih Berri's aide, expressed belief the regional and international decision to distance Lebanon from the developments in the area remains in an indirect way. However, the minister warned that the Lebanese accord reached after the Battle of Arsal would deteriorate if the presidency post remains vacant. The majority of the March 8 Alliance's MPs, including the Change and Reform bloc to which Khalil belongs, boycotted the sessions aimed at electing a head of state, causing lack of quorum. He said the country's political impasse should be wisely confronted. This comes after Hezbollah Minister Hussein Haj Hassan on Saturday said the Arab world should confront the conspiracy that is distorting the image of Islam, saying Gulf countries now fear the monster they created, in direct reference to ISIS. Hezbollah has said they were fighting in Syria against the rise of Takfiri groups and the possibility of such fighters infiltrating Lebanon. While voicing the party's undying support for the resistance in Gaza, Haj Hassan said countries now feared the monster they created. Hezbollah has repeatedly accused Arab states of funding and backing extremist groups against resistance forces in the region and with the aim of forcing the collapse of President Bashar al-Assad.
Maronite Patriarch Shadadai has called for dialogue between Lebanese political factions, urging them to stop conveying their personal opinions as the one and only absolute opinion. Adai's comments came during Sunday Mass at his summer residence in Diman, in which he added that the presidential void resulted from political inflexibility and urged factions to abandon their personal interests to accommodate rival opinions and outlooks. The Patriarch also called on factions to employ bold initiatives that challenge the ongoing gridlock before the next session to elect a president, which is set for September the 2nd. Interior Minister Nuhad al-Mashnouk has expressed confidence that the cabinet's new policy on Syrian refugees will succeed, announcing new arrangements to facilitate its implementation. Mashnouk said the cabinet will build special lines on all border crossings to solve the legal status of the Syrians willing to leave Lebanon. He explained that the government would build a center inside Beirut's Rafiq Hariri International Airport and another near the eastern town of Arsal to facilitate the passing of Syrian refugees back to Syria. Mashnouk said this arrangement will eventually lead to reducing pressure on the other border crossings in the north and Masna area. The cabinet on Thursday had agreed that Syrians wishing to return home for good should be exempt from any residency-related fees or fines at the border. It said the decision will go into effect in the next 3 months. ISIS militants have withdrawn from areas north of the Syrian city of Homs and have retreated east after coming under attack from rival Islamist fighters. The Islamic State of Iraq and the Levant, an al-Qaeda offshoot, has advanced often unhindered across Syria and neighboring Iraq in recent months. The Syrian Observatory for Human Rights says fighters from the group withdrew from a headquarters north of Homs on the orders of their leader, Abu Bakr al-Baghdadi. ISIS gave up the territory to the Nusra Front, al-Qaeda's official wing in Syria, according to the observatory, which tracks violence through sources on the ground. ISIS has also clashed with forces loyal to Syrian President Bashar al-Assad in strategic areas, mainly a military airbase east of the city of Raqqa, the government's last foothold in the area. And coming up next, China executes 8 Tiananmen Square attackers. More after the break. Against the Islamist movement Hamas in and around Gaza. Lebanese media reports say the rocket was launched from Lebanon's border region of Naura. The rocket attacks from South Lebanon into northern Palestine come after Israel resumed a brutal aggression against the Gaza Strip earlier this week. More in this report.
Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu told his ministers that the military campaign against Gaza militants would continue until peace is restored to southern Israel. At a special session of the cabinet held at the Defense Ministry and Tel Aviv, he repeated a warning of harsh retribution for the death of an Israeli child on Friday in a rocket strike on a kibbutz near the Gaza border. He added a veiled warning to Lebanon and Syria after overnight rocket fire into Israeli territory. Earlier this morning, 5 rockets fired from Syrian-controlled territory slammed into the Israeli-occupied sector of the Golan Heights, but caused no casualties. Netanyahu has warned Gaza residents to leave any site where Palestinian fighters were operating, saying the locations could be attacked. Israel has carried out a series of airstrikes on several commercial and residential targets across Gaza, with a 7-story office building being the latest one. On Sunday morning, Gaza police said Israeli airstrikes collapsed Zafar Tower. On the same day, a building containing shops in Rafah was hit by an Israeli airstrike, causing a fire. 6 Palestinians were injured in the incident, according to Gaza health officials at Najjar Hospital in Rafah. Meanwhile, a rocket fired from Lebanon has struck a house in northern Israel. No one has claimed responsibility for the attack. Amid the violence, Palestinian President Mahmoud Abbas held talks with senior officials of the Arab League on Saturday night in the Egyptian capital of Cairo. Earlier in the day, Abbas stressed his willingness to achieve a long-term ceasefire between the two enemies. The Egyptian Foreign Ministry on Saturday urged Israel and Hamas to resume indirect talks and agree to an open-ended ceasefire. Meanwhile, the official school year started in Gaza City, but most local schools are not open for thousands of local children. The majority of them are being used by the United Nations Relief and Works Agency to shelter the thousands of displaced people who have had to leave their homes due to the ongoing conflict. Even so, at the UN-run Rimel Elementary School in Gaza City, and the children lined up and sang while the families that have taken refuge in the school watched from balconies and windows. The UN estimates that more than 17,000 homes have been destroyed or damaged beyond repair since the conflict began on July the 8th. Since the fighting began, Israel has launched some 5,000 airstrikes at Gaza, while Gaza militants have fired close to 4,000 rockets and mortars. More than 2,000 Palestinians, including close to 500 children, have been killed. Israel has lost 64 soldiers and 4 civilians.
And still in the Middle East, unidentified warplanes have attacked targets in Libya's capital, Tripoli, hours after forces from the city of Misrata said they had seized the main airport. Tripoli residents heard jets followed by explosions at dawn, but no more details were immediately available. Meanwhile, Egypt denied taking any part in airstrikes on Libyan fighter positions in Tripoli after the armed group that captured the airport accused the country of involvement in the recent attacks. In recent weeks, Libya has seen the worst fighting since the NATO-backed campaign to oust Muammar Gaddafi in 2011. Renegade General Khalifa Haftar has declared war on Islamist-leaning forces, part of growing anarchy in the oil producer. His forces claimed responsibility for air raids on Tripoli Saturday and last Monday, targeting a group called Operation Dawn. Iranian Foreign Minister Mohammad Javad Zarif has begun a two-day visit to Iraq, which is fighting a Sunni insurgency led by ISIS jihadists. Zarif has met his Iraqi counterpart Hoshyar Zebari, as well as the Prime Minister-designate Haidar al-Abadi, with the issue of the Iran-Iraq border demarcation also on the agenda. Iran was a longtime backer of the outgoing Premier Nouri al-Maliki before dropping the support of the divisive leader in favor of Abadi. Tehran has called for Iraqi parties to unite in the face of ISIS, which has seized large swaths of the country, and says it is providing advice to Iraqi Kurds fighting the jihadists. And now for some news around the world in brief. 2 earthquakes measuring over 5 in magnitude, the biggest recorded so far, have shaken Iceland's Bardarbunga volcano after the country issued an aviation red alert warning that an ash-emitting eruption may be imminent. Iceland's meteorological office said there were no signs of an eruption. Authorities have declared a no-fly zone of 185 kilometers by 260 kilometers around the epicenter as a precaution. Ukraine is celebrating its anniversary of independence with army parades in show of the country's military force as the Kiev government continues to fight against pro-Russian armed groups in the east of the war-torn country. Ahead of the parade, Ukrainian President Petro Poroshenko says Ukraine will be under constant military threat for the foreseeable future, announcing that $3 billion will be spent on re-equipping the army. China has executed 8 people for alleged terrorist attacks across the country, including 3 who masterminded a car crash in the capital Beijing Tiananmen Square last year. 5 people were killed and 40 injured in the Beijing attack when a car plowed into a crowd in the square and burst into flames. More and more hacker attacks on the databases of large companies are causing residents of the United States to worry about the safety of their personal information. Atlanta-based United Parcel Service, one of the world's biggest companies, said in an urgent announcement that some of its customers may have had their credit and debit card information exposed by a computer virus found on systems at 51 stores in 24 states across the United States. The data, including names, card numbers, and postal and email addresses, were breached from about 100,000 transactions between January 20th and August 11th. The U.S. retailer giant SuperValue, Goodwill thrift stores, and even some large medical organizations and education systems also issued hacking warnings on their websites. This marks the end of our bulletin for today. Now for a reminder of our headlines. Progressive Socialist Party leader MP Walid Jumblat says he rejects the idea of linking Hezbollah to ISIS and stresses the importance of supporting the army in its battle against terrorism. A rocket fired from Lebanese territory hit northern Israel on the 47th day of a war against Hamas in and around Gaza. And Israel launches more airstrikes on Gaza, pounding a 13-story apartment tower following a warning to residents to evacuate. Those are your top stories for the weekend. I'm Linda Tamim, wishing you all a very nice evening.